People who knew a murderer, what were the signs they were going to kill someone? We were partners in science lab. He was a little weird and creepy, but always nice to me in his own odd way. We messed around a lot in that class, drawing pictures and coming up with stupid products we could supposedly invent and sell someday. People joked that he was going to be a serial killer because he fit the vibe, creepy, bullied, dressed in all black, etc. He was a total jerk to everyone else and would threaten them, but he and I were always cool. I was nice to him because I didn't have many friends either, and like I said, he was always decent to me. One day he drew me a picture. It showed a stick figure being attacked by a grappling hook, and then a couch with a smiley face on it. The caption said, "I will kill you and make a sofa out of your skin." Of course, in high school I laughed it off. A few years later, he actually killed someone, stabbing them dozens of times over a computer. I'm glad I was nice to him. I still have the drawing. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to subscribe for more. 5 years ago, at my brother's wedding, one of the guests had recently lost her husband. So as her plus one, she brought her son instead. He was good-looking, in his late 20s, and mostly friendly, but he spent the entire night hitting on every single girl there. It was incredibly obnoxious, especially after multiple family members complained. I got a drink with him at the bar, and he started ranting about how fucking prude all the girls were and how they needed to learn a lesson about dealing with real men. I thought he might have been drunk, but then I realized he was only drinking club soda with lime. When I asked why he wasn't drinking, he said, "I like to stay focused, let the bitches get fucked up themselves." I just smiled and walked away, not wanting to keep talking to someone with a mindset like that. The next year, I was getting married. When we sent out invitations, his mother was invited as a family friend, and on the RSVP she added his name too. I told my mom she could not bring him under any circumstance. There was a whole argument over it. My mom didn't want to be rude to a guest, but I told her, "Say whatever you need to say, but he's not coming to my wedding." I said he was a psycho, that he had harassed multiple people at the last wedding, and that I didn't want someone like that anywhere near my big day. Ultimately, he was not invited. On the day of my wedding, his mother left the reception crying. The next day, we found out why. Her son had murdered his girlfriend and his girlfriend's best friend that same day. I've always felt guilty, wondering if maybe, if he had been at our wedding, he might not have killed those girls. Maybe he would have done it later. Maybe he would have done something worse. Maybe he wouldn't have killed anyone at all. I don't know. One of the regular customers at the grocery store where I worked over 20 years ago was a truly creepy guy. The best way I can describe him is cold. Just cold. You couldn't make small talk with him or chat while ringing up his groceries. In fact, he barely spoke at all, and when he did, his voice was just cold. He also had a real physical presence. He was probably around 300 pounds, with wide shoulders, big arms, and a broad chest. Not a nice man, definitely not someone you wanted to be around if you could avoid it. And he never, ever, smiled. His face was set in a permanent scowl. Eventually, it came out that he had been abusing his wife and kids for years. He had this disturbing, bigamous, incestuous cult-like setup where he had married his wife's sisters and even his own daughters, fathering multiple children with several wives. Eventually, some of the women managed to overcome their fear and alerted the authorities. But when the police arrived to arrest him, he barricaded himself in the house and refused to come out. When he finally did emerge, it turned out he had been stalling the police to give himself enough time to murder all the children who were inside the house. I think he killed 8 or 9 of his own kids. He wasn't the only mass murderer who shopped at our store, but he was definitely the worst. I knew a kid I was friends with when I was about 6 or 7. He used to tell me that a serial killer lived inside his body, a different personality with a different name and everything. I remember one time the serial killer personality came out while we were playing video games, and he forced me out of my room and wouldn't let me back in. Another time, when my back was turned, he carved the serial killer's initials into my dresser with a knife. After that second incident, my parents stopped letting me hang out with him. Not long after, he moved away and I never saw him again. Looking back, I think he had a lot of trauma. I'm pretty sure his parents were alcoholics, and he was in and out of homelessness. He never let me go to his house. I did manage to visit once, and the vibe was extremely strange. Anyway, 25 years later, thinking back on it, that was some pretty alarming behavior. Sometimes I wonder where he is these days, but I don't remember his name and wouldn't even know how to check in. I grew up with one of the most callous, unimaginable bullies, someone who got away with everything for years because his parents were respected, high-ranking members of society. He was exploitative, violent, and sexually deviant toward his targets. He would kidnap family pets, kill them, and then show the videos to people at school. He was also very selective about who he targeted. He always went for the absolute weakest, the lowest on the social food chain. He often bullied and harassed them in private rather than at school or on the bus because he didn't want any resistance, and they were more vulnerable when no one else was around. A friend of mine was assaulted by him, and she told me that he had figured out her parents didn't get home from work until a few hours after she returned from school. He would show up at her house and try to charm his way inside. When she eventually rejected him, he broke in and tried to coerce her into having sex with him. She refused, and at that point he physically assaulted her and threatened her. All of this was ignored, and it showed just how much you can get away with if you're connected to the right people. A few years after graduation, he attempted to murder a girl and assaulted another in almost the same way he had assaulted my friend. He was sentenced to a very long prison term and died from natural causes before the age of 35. When I was in grad school, one of my nephews was a freshman at the same college, so we would see each other pretty regularly and usually had lunch together at least once a week. He always told me about the new friends he was making, and one guy in particular started coming up in conversation. You know the type, rich parents, skips class, always has money to throw around, parties constantly, pays the bar tab for everyone, that kind of guy. So far, so good. I met him once, and he was a total tool, the kind of person I personally wouldn't waste 2 minutes on, but who am I to tell my nephew not to hang out with some douche who will probably flunk out sooner rather than later anyway? Weeks went by, and my nephew's stories about the guy started getting a bit more concerning. Now he was pulling jackass-style stunts, doing dangerous and mean-spirited pranks, often involving damage to other people's property. He also encouraged my nephew and their friends to skip class and go drinking or partying instead of doing assignments or studying for tests, even the night before an actual exam, and he'd call them lame or gay if they didn't go along with him. So I told my nephew not to be a dumbass and let himself get dragged along in douchey McDusherson's wake. That guy was set for life, whether he flunked out or ended up in jail for the sexual assault of a classmate or whatever else you'd expect from someone like him. His parents were rich as hell and he'd never struggle. Meanwhile, the people he was dragging down would be wasting scholarships, student loans, and their parents' hard-earned money if they didn't take school seriously. A few more weeks went by and the semester ended. My nephew finally told me how douchey McDusherson flunked every single course he was taking. Shocking, I know. His parents were furious. They made him move back home, took away his money, his credit cards, his car, and grounded his ass while they figured out what to do for the next semester. The thing is, the guy didn't like not being able to do whatever he wanted. So he killed his mother and tried to kill his father. Luckily, Pops McDusherson managed to escape the house, ran to his office, called the cops, and they arrested his piece of shit son. Last I heard, Pops hired an amazing lawyer and Douchey is already a free man just a few years later. I shit you not. There was a kid I knew in middle school who was very quiet, I'll call him Jay. He had friends, some of them mutual with me, but they didn't treat him well. I don't know the details of their personal relationships, but they would steal from him and talk shit about him behind his back. And not normal shit talk, I mean genuinely cruel, mean-spirited comments. Random, unnecessary insults about someone who wasn't even there. I never spent much one-on-one time with him. After we graduated, one of our mutual friends, the same one who I knew had broken into Jay's house once, invited me to a party. I went with my girlfriend at the time, and Jay was there. People weren't treating him as badly anymore since we had all grown up a bit. The problem was that Jay had shown up dressed as the Joker. He wasn't acting the part, but his hair was dyed bright green and he was wearing the iconic purple trench coat. As the night went on, Jay was actually making people laugh, and he even caught the attention of a girl at the party. We were all getting pretty drunk. At one point I went outside to vomit so I could keep drinking, and Jay came with me to make sure I could get back up the stairs afterward, but after puking, I was fine. We went back up and everything was still lighthearted. At some point in the night, though, he started crying and sobbing. He said he didn't want to start a pity party, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. He talked about how he felt like people weren't really his friends, how he believed they only pretended to be nice so they could mess with him. After trying to reassure him, he shifted to talking about his dad. His mom had died shortly after he was born, I'm not sure how, so all he had was his father. He started talking about what a piece of shit his dad was. But because of how drunk he was, and how drunk I was, I either don't remember exactly what he said, or he was too hysterical and incoherent for me to understand. I eventually passed out for a few hours. When I woke up, the girl he'd been with had left without him, and he was sitting alone on the balcony chain-smoking. You could buy cigarettes at 18 back then. I went out to smoke with him, and we had a surprisingly normal conversation. He was just a regular guy with hopes and dreams, and it seemed like he had a lot of love to give, but no one wanted it. At the time, I wasn't sure if the kind of affection he offered was something anyone actually wanted. Earlier that night he came off like someone who could smother people with his need for connection. Still, it was a nice moment between us. After I left the next morning, I didn't see him again. I didn't see most of the people from that party ever again, honestly. A little less than a year later, my ex-girlfriend, same girl from the party, sent me an article. Jay had stabbed his father to death and had been living with the body, untouched where he killed him, for nearly a week. I can't say that if his friends had treated him better, hell, maybe if I had been a better friend, he wouldn't have done it. But he was clearly fighting some serious demons. At the party, I thought he was troubled, but I didn't think he had that in him. I can't be sure if I'm remembering correctly, maybe my brain is filling in blanks, but in hindsight I remember him saying something like, I'd kill him if I could get away with it. Again, this could be a manufactured memory. And when people say things like that, you rarely take it seriously. Especially in the Midwest, where people tend to speak in hyperbole all the time. I believe he's still in prison now. I don't think he was a bad person, just someone who lived a tragically unfair life. Shitty friends, a mother he lost as an infant, and a cruel father. Something must have happened that finally broke him. Does attempted murder count? I won't pretend I knew he was capable of trying to kill someone, but this guy was a creep. I had just moved back to Illinois from California after a pretty traumatic experience. Once I started to get back on my feet, I took a job selling cars at a Honda dealership. I'd been working in sales, so it felt like something I could do until a better option showed up. That's where I met this guy named Matt. Right off the bat, he was a dickhead. He did all the unethical things only car salesmen know about, stealing UPS, putting existing customers under his own name, and so on. He also had this rule where he wouldn't talk to new guys until they'd made it past the 90-day probationary period. He would literally make eye contact with you and then look away as if you didn't exist. And of course, he was the top salesman. I guess that's why management looked the other way when people complained about him. He'd send flowers to the young receptionist who was clearly not interested. He made female customers uncomfortable. Eventually it came out that he was a registered sex offender, which he explained away as some Romeo and Juliet situation. For the first couple of months, I hated him. But then I started to understand him a little. The guy was a loser. He had no friends, and whenever someone seemed even remotely willing to be his friend, he would suffocate them. Same with women, total love bomber. Red flag, I know. I ended up working there for a little over a year, way longer than I planned. During that time, he started seeing me as a friend and would invite me out for different things. I felt bad for him, but I also didn't actually want to hang out with him, so I rarely accepted, aside from a few nights out at the bar with other coworkers. After I left, I still got my car serviced at the dealership, and I'd chat with the guys, including Matt. When I told them I was getting married, he asked where. I told him, and his face lit up. His sister was a planner at that venue. He occasionally bartended there and said he'd have his sister put him on staff that night so he could make sure we were taken care of. It was actually sweet. And to his credit, he made sure everything was perfect for us. After the wedding, the bridal party was staying on site. We were hungry, and Matt was sort of lingering. I worried he might try to join the group and creep on some of the girls, but he didn't. Instead, he found the only pizza place open that late. They didn't deliver, and he went to pick it up. When he handed me the boxes, all the cash I had given him was still there. He'd paid himself and refused to take any money. After that, I started referring people to him, thinking, okay, he's weird, but he's just really, really lonely. My wife and I even bought a car from him. I remember sitting at his desk, looking at the 3 Salesman of the Year plaques behind him, which he admitted he had made himself. He had been the top salesman, but the dealership didn't give out plaques. A few years later, he texted me saying his girlfriend had started a massage therapy business and he was trying to help her get clients. He suggested I buy my wife a gift certificate for Christmas. I told him I was all set with gifts but that I was happy he'd found someone. He replied, "Thanks, she's pretty amazing." About a month later, I saw more unmarked cop cars than I'd ever seen zooming down a main road in my city. I thought it was odd but didn't dwell on it. About 2 hours later, my dad, whom I had referred to Matt, sent me a link to a news story. I opened it and saw Matt's mugshot. He'd been arrested for kidnapping, burglary, sexual assault, and first-degree attempted murder. It turns out he had love-bombed this new woman. He set her up with a new place and, from what I heard from the old dealership crew, even furnished it for her. I think it freaked her out, or maybe she simply wasn't into him. She dumped him. He snapped. One morning, after she dropped her kids off at the bus stop, she returned home and found him waiting. He tied her up and put her in his trunk. Then he drove her to his mother's house. He didn't live there, and she was out of town. He chained her to a workbench in the basement and, over the course of 2 days, brutally beat and raped her. When he left the house for a bit, she dragged the bench up the stairs and made it to the driveway, bloody, naked, still chained to the bench, screaming for help. The neighbors called the police. Matt led them on a chase into the next state, where he crashed his car and was ejected. He survived. In hindsight, we all should have seen it coming. And the previous sex crime, the one from 20 years earlier, was far more serious than the little Romeo and Juliet story he told. Still, I was shocked. Not by the fact that he snapped, people do, but by the sheer sadism of what he did. Afterward, a bunch of local news stories ran about the case, and one woman kept commenting on all of them, claiming he was well known among local sex workers for the awful things he did, beating them, defecating on them, and other horrific stuff. Her post history made her look unhinged, but she was adamant. He was eventually convicted on nearly every count and will die in prison. And even knowing everything I know now, the strange part is that I don't look back on my interactions with him feeling chills. I still genuinely believe that my wife, my friends, and I were never in danger. But then again, who knows what would have happened if something had ever made him feel like I'd screwed him over. Either way, I'm relieved he's never coming back to society.